The night I challenged the most feared man in Boston had not started with courage. It started with rent. My rent. My overdue electric bill. My little sister's prescription sitting on a pharmacy shelf waiting for money I did not have. By 7 o'clock, I was carrying a silver tray through the Grand Harbor Ballroom, smiling at people whose watches cost more than my car. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light across polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly near the stage. Everywhere I looked, walls sparkled. Diamonds. Champagne. Perfect smiles. I felt invisible among all of it. That was usually how I preferred things. My name is Grace Miller. I was 23 years old, painfully shy, and working my third event that week. Invisible people survived. Invisible people avoided embarrassment. Invisible people got through the night and collected their paycheck. At least that was the plan. The ballroom buzzed with conversation as politicians, executives, and socialites filled the room. I moved carefully between tables, balancing drinks and avoiding attention. Most guests never looked directly at me. I was part of the furniture, part of the service, part of the background. Honestly, I liked it that way. Then he arrived. The change happened before I even saw him. Conversations lowered. Waiters straightened their posture. Security personnel became more alert. A ripple moved through the room like a sudden change in weather. Curious, I glanced toward the entrance. Adrian Blackwell stepped inside. I knew the name long before I knew the face. Everyone in Boston knew the name. Stories followed him everywhere. Some called him a businessman. Others called him something far more dangerous. Whatever the truth was, one thing seemed certain. Powerful people respected him. Powerful people feared him. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit and carried himself with quiet confidence. No bodyguards hovered around him. None were necessary. The room itself seemed to move aside. He walked toward the center table and took his seat beneath the largest chandelier in the ballroom. Then life continued. Or at least it tried to. The quartet resumed playing. Conversations returned. Champagne flowed. Yet something felt different. Every few minutes I caught people glancing toward his table, checking his reactions, measuring his mood. I wondered what it must be like to have an entire room orbit around your existence. I delivered another tray of drinks and headed toward the kitchen entrance when a text message appeared on my phone. It was from my sister. The prescription is ready. Do not worry. We can wait until next week if we have to. My chest tightened. She always said things like that. She always tried to make our problems sound smaller than they were. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and forced myself to smile. One more shift. One more paycheck. Everything would be okay. At least that was what I kept telling myself. A burst of laughter erupted near one of the premium tables. Several wealthy guests raised their glasses while discussing vacation homes and private jets. I passed them quietly. Nobody noticed me. Nobody remembered me. Yet as I crossed the ballroom, carrying a fresh tray of sparkling water, I felt something unexpected. A gaze, strong enough to stop me mid-step. Slowly, I turned my head. Across the room, Adrian Blackwell was looking directly at me. Not at the tray, not at the guests around me. At me. The moment lasted only a second. Then someone at his table spoke, and he looked away. My heart continued racing anyway. I told myself it meant nothing. Why would it mean anything? I was just another waitress in another ballroom on another night. I had no idea that before the evening ended, the entire room would know my name. If I had known how quickly an invisible life could fall apart, I would have left the ballroom the moment I felt his eyes on me. Instead, I picked up another tray and kept working. That was what people like me did. We worked. We endured. We stayed quiet. The evening moved forward beneath golden chandeliers and polished marble. Guests drifted from table to table carrying champagne flutes and conversations worth millions of dollars. Somewhere near the stage, a charity auction was beginning. The host's voice echoed warmly through the ballroom while screens displayed photographs of schools, hospitals, and community programs. Everyone applauded. Everyone smiled. It looked beautiful. It felt beautiful. Yet something about the room had changed. Maybe it was because I knew Adrian Blackwell was there. Maybe it was because I kept catching myself looking toward his table when I should have been focused on work. Either way, I could not ignore the strange tension beneath the glamour. Around 9 o'clock, I was assigned to serve one of the premium tables near the center of the ballroom, the kind of table reserved for people whose names appeared on buildings. I approached carefully with a tray of sparkling water. A young man wearing an expensive navy tuxedo sat among the guests. He looked handsome in the polished, effortless way wealth often allows. Confident smile, perfect hair, expensive watch. The type of man who expected every room to belong to him. As I reached toward the table, he glanced at my name tag. Grace. His smile widened slightly. That is a pretty name. I offered a polite nod. Thank you, sir. Normally, that would have ended the conversation. Instead, he continued speaking. You should smile more. A charity gala is supposed to be cheerful. A few people at the table laughed softly. My face warmed. I am sorry if I seem distracted. Distracted? He repeated. Or just shy? More laughter followed. Nothing openly cruel. Nothing dramatic. Yet I felt myself shrinking beneath their attention. I forced another polite smile and prepared to leave. Then the young man leaned back in his chair. Tell me something, Grace. Have you ever actually attended one of these events as a guest? The question caught me off guard. I shook my head. No, sir. I thought so. He lifted his glass. People spend years learning how to belong in rooms like this. Several guests nodded. One woman smiled sympathetically, which somehow felt worse. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open beneath me. Instead, I stood there holding my tray while embarrassment burned across my cheeks. Across the ballroom, the string quartet continued playing. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath chandelier light. Nobody seemed to notice. Nobody except one person. My eyes drifted toward the center table almost by instinct. Adrian Blackwell was watching. Not me specifically. Not yet. The table. The conversation. The people laughing. His expression never changed. Yet something about his gaze felt colder than before. I quickly looked away. The young man raised his glass again. Do not worry, Grace. We all have our place. More laughter followed. Soft. Polite. Elegant. Somehow that made it sting even more. I lowered my eyes and started to turn away. Then I heard the auction host announce that the ballroom would soon open for dancing. The crowd responded with enthusiastic applause. Couples smiled. Musicians adjusted their instruments. The atmosphere brightened instantly. Yet as I stepped away from the table, carrying my now empty tray, I could not shake the feeling that the worst part of my evening had not happened yet. And judging by the way Adrian Blackwell continued watching from across the room, neither could he. Some moments change your life because something extraordinary happens. Others change your life because you finally decide you have had enough. I wish I could say courage arrived like lightning. It did not. It arrived slowly, quietly, one humiliating comment at a time. I spent the next 30 minutes moving through the ballroom pretending everything was normal. The string quartet played elegant music. Guests laughed over champagne. Auction winners posed for photographs beside oversized donation checks. On the surface, the evening looked perfect. Inside, I felt smaller with every passing minute. The young man at the premium table continued entertaining his friends. Each time I passed nearby, another joke appeared. Another comment disguised as humor. Nothing openly cruel. Nothing anyone could point to and condemn. Just enough to remind me where he believed I belonged. Invisible. Beneath him. Beneath everyone in that room. By 10 o'clock, the dance floor had officially opened. Couples drifted beneath the chandeliers while the orchestra replaced the quartet. The music grew richer, warmer, more romantic. I watched from the edge of the ballroom while balancing another tray of drinks. For a moment, I imagined what it might feel like to belong somewhere beautiful without having to work there. Then I laughed at myself. Daydreams did not pay bills. Reality did. A voice interrupted my thoughts. Grace. I turned and immediately wished I had not. The same young man stood there holding a champagne glass. Several friends lingered behind him, watching, waiting. Yes, sir. His smile widened. You have been staring at the dance floor all evening. Heat climbed into my face. I was working, of course. More quiet laughter followed. He glanced toward the dancers. Tell me, do you know how to dance? I should have walked away. Instead, exhaustion answered for me. A little, he repeated. That sounds optimistic. One of his friends chuckled. Another shook his head. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, the young man raised his glass toward the center of the ballroom. People spend years learning elegance, grace. It is not something you pick up overnight. Around us, several nearby guests began paying attention. Not because I mattered, because wealthy people often enjoy entertainment. Even when the entertainment is another person. I felt every pair of eyes settling on me. The old version of myself would have apologized, smiled politely, escaped as quickly as possible. Instead, something unexpected happened. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe it was my sister waiting for medication I could barely afford. Maybe it was the memory of spending my entire life trying to stay invisible. Whatever the reason, I suddenly felt tired of shrinking. My hands stopped shaking. My shoulders straightened. The ballroom noise seemed to fade. "You are right," I said quietly. The young man blinked. "Excuse me." I looked directly at him. "Elegance is not something money can buy." The laughter stopped. Completely. The silence spread farther than I expected. Nearby conversations slowed. Several guests turned toward us. The young man's smile weakened slightly. "That is an interesting opinion." My pulse pounded inside my ears. Every instinct begged me to stop talking. Instead, I glanced across the ballroom, toward the table beneath the largest chandelier, toward the man everyone watched. Adrian Blackwell was already looking in our direction, waiting, observing, calm as ever. A reckless thought entered my mind, the kind of thought that changes everything. Before fear could stop me, I lifted my chin and spoke loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Then let him decide." The young man's expression froze. Confusion spread across nearby faces. My heart felt seconds away from bursting through my chest. Yet somehow I continued. I turned fully toward Adrian Blackwell. Every eye in the ballroom followed. Every conversation died. Every musician seemed to miss a note. Then, with more courage than I had ever possessed in my entire life, I looked directly at the most feared man in the room and said, "Mr. Blackwell, would you dance with me?" For one endless second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire ballroom seemed suspended beneath the golden glow of the chandeliers. I immediately regretted everything. My courage vanished the moment the words left my mouth. What had I done? I was a waitress. A shy waitress. I had just challenged the most powerful man in the room in front of hundreds of witnesses. Heat rushed into my face. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the orchestra. Around me, guests stared in complete disbelief. The young man who had been mocking me looked as though he had forgotten how to blink. Several people exchanged stunned glances. Others simply watched Adrian Blackwell, waiting, because everything depended on what he did next. I considered apologizing, pretending it was a joke, running straight into the kitchen and never coming back. Then Adrian slowly stood. The movement was simple, quiet, yet it carried more weight than anything else that had happened that evening. Conversations died completely. Even the orchestra faltered before recovering. Adrian adjusted the cuff of his jacket and stepped away from his table. One step, then another. The crowd instinctively moved aside to create a path through the ballroom. Nobody asked them to. Nobody needed to. My pulse climbed higher with every foot he crossed. He never looked at anyone else. Only me. The distance between us seemed impossible. Then suddenly it was gone. Adrian stopped directly in front of me. Up close, he looked even more intimidating than before. Taller, sharper, more composed. Yet his expression revealed nothing. Not anger, not amusement, not even curiosity. Just calm. The kind of calm that made everyone else nervous. "Miss Miller," he said. His voice was deep and controlled. Hearing my name from him felt strangely unreal. "Yes, sir." My voice barely worked. A few people nearby leaned forward, desperate not to miss a single word. Adrian glanced briefly toward the young man standing behind me. Then his attention returned to mine. "Are you certain this is what you want?" The question surprised me. I had expected rejection, perhaps embarrassment. Instead, he sounded almost respectful. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat. Then I remembered my sister. The bills waiting at home. Years of keeping my head down and accepting whatever people decided I deserved. Slowly, I nodded. Yes. Something changed in his eyes. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, Adrian extended his hand. The ballroom collectively forgot how to breathe. My gaze dropped to his hand. Strong, steady, waiting. I placed my hand in his. The moment our hands touched, a murmur spread across the room. Not because anything romantic happened. Nothing did. It was because nobody expected this outcome. Especially not the young man whose smile had completely disappeared. Adrian guided me toward the center of the dance floor. The orchestra, sensing something extraordinary, shifted into a slower piece. Elegant piano notes drifted through the ballroom. Every eye followed us. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to hide. Yet somehow, walking beside him, I felt taller than I had all night. When we reached the center of the floor, Adrian turned toward me. "You know," he said quietly enough that only I could hear. Most people spend their lives trying not to attract my attention. I almost smiled despite my nerves. I was trying not to. For the first time, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not a full smile, just the beginning of one. Then he placed his hand respectfully at the appropriate distance and prepared to begin the dance. Around us, the ballroom watched in complete silence. And for the first time that night, I realized the room was no longer laughing. The first few steps felt impossible. My heart was racing. My palms were warm. Every instinct told me I did not belong in the center of that ballroom. Yet somehow Adrian Blackwell moved through the dance as though the hundreds of people watching us did not exist. The orchestra played softly beneath the chandeliers while reflections of golden light shimmered across the polished marble floor. Around us, conversations remained silent. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. I focused on the dance. One step, then another. If I thought about the audience, I would freeze. If I thought about the powerful man standing in front of me, I would probably stop breathing altogether. Adrian seemed to notice my struggle. "Relax," he said quietly. "Easy for you to say." The words escaped before I could stop them. For a brief moment, surprise flickered across his face. Then something unexpected happened. He laughed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to reveal he was still human beneath all the stories people told about him. "Fair point," he admitted. The simple response eased something inside me. I found myself smiling despite the situation. Across the ballroom, I noticed several guests staring in disbelief. Apparently, they were just as surprised by his reaction as I was. The music continued. Gradually, my breathing slowed. My movements became steadier. The fear that had followed me all evening began fading away. Not completely, just enough to let me think clearly. "Can I ask you something?" Adrian said. "I think you already are." Another hint of amusement appeared in his eyes. "Why did you do it?" I knew exactly what he meant. Why challenge him? Why step into the spotlight? Why risk humiliating myself in front of half of Boston's elite? I looked briefly toward the edge of the ballroom. The young man who had mocked me stood frozen among his friends. Nobody was laughing anymore. "Because I was tired," I said. Adrian's expression shifted slightly. "Tired?" I nodded. "Tired of pretending that people with less money deserve less respect." The orchestra filled the silence between us. Nearby chandeliers sparkled overhead like tiny stars. Adrian listened carefully without interrupting. "Most of my life," I continued, "I have watched people decide who matters before a conversation even begins." My voice remained soft. Tonight I got tired of letting them. For several seconds, Adrian said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on mine. Not intimidating, not cold, just thoughtful, as though my words mattered. It was a strange feeling, one I was not accustomed to. "You know," he finally said, "most people spend an entire lifetime trying to impress a room like this." I glanced around the ballroom. I am not very impressed by it right now. This time his smile appeared instantly. Genuine, unfiltered. The reaction startled me. More importantly, it startled everyone else. I noticed several guests exchanging confused looks. Others stared openly. The man who had seemed untouchable all evening suddenly looked different. Warmer, lighter somehow. Adrian followed my gaze toward the crowd. "You have caused quite a disturbance." I noticed. "Do you regret it?" The answer arrived without hesitation. "No." The honesty surprised both of us. I expected fear, embarrassment. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar. Pride. Not because I was dancing with a powerful man. Because for the first time in a very long time, I had stood up for myself. Adrian studied me quietly. Then his voice dropped low enough that only I could hear. "That is rare." I frowned slightly. "What is?" His eyes moved briefly across the ballroom before returning to mine. "Someone who values their dignity more than other people's approval." The music continued swirling around us. The crowd remained silent. And standing there beneath 1,000 lights, I suddenly realized something important. Adrian Blackwell was not watching me because I challenged him. He was watching me because I was the first person in that room who had not cared whether he approved of me. The dance should have ended after a few minutes. Instead, it felt as though time itself had slowed beneath the chandeliers. The orchestra continued playing while the ballroom remained unusually quiet. Not silent, just attentive. Hundreds of people watched without pretending otherwise. Yet for the first time all evening, I stopped noticing them. My attention stayed fixed on the man standing across from me. Adrian moved with effortless confidence, But there was something different now. The distance he carried around everyone else seemed thinner somehow. Less guarded. "You are uncomfortable with attention," he observed. I laughed softly. That might be the understatement of the year. Another hint of amusement crossed his face. "Then why are you handling this so well?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about it for a moment. "Because I spent most of my life being ignored." His expression changed slightly. "And it turns out being noticed is less frightening than being dismissed." The orchestra shifted into a slower arrangement. Nearby couples continued dancing, but nobody attracted the same attention we did. Adrian considered my answer carefully. Most people in this room would disagree. I glanced around the ballroom. Wealth glittered from every corner. Expensive jewelry, designer gowns, perfectly rehearsed smiles. Yet suddenly it all felt strangely fragile. Most people in this room have never worried about becoming invisible. Adrian did not respond immediately. His gaze moved across the crowd before returning to mine. You might be surprised. Something in his tone made me curious. For the first time all evening, I wondered what his life actually looked like beneath the rumors and headlines. People feared him, respected him, watched his every move. But standing here, he looked less like a legend and more like a man carrying responsibilities nobody understood. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You already have." "A real question." His mouth curved slightly. "Go ahead." I hesitated. Every sensible part of me suggested changing the subject. Instead, I asked the question anyway. "Why were you watching me earlier?" The honesty surprised both of us. Around us, the music continued flowing through the ballroom. Adrian's expression became thoughtful. "Because you were different." I blinked. "Different how?" He looked toward the guests gathered around the edge of the dance floor. "Everyone here wants something." The answer came quietly. "Money, influence, approval, access." His eyes returned to mine. "You did not." I felt unexpectedly self-conscious. "That is because I was carrying a tray." "No." He shook his head slightly. "It is because you were focused on other people." I frowned. "I do not understand." Adrian nodded toward the far side of the ballroom. "You checked your phone 3 times after receiving a message." My eyes widened. "You noticed that?" "Yes." "That is slightly unsettling." For the first time all night, he laughed openly. The sound was brief, but genuine. Several nearby guests immediately turned toward him in disbelief. Apparently, they were not accustomed to hearing it either. When the laughter faded, Adrian's expression softened. "You looked worried." His voice grew quieter. "Not for yourself. For someone else." My throat tightened. I thought about my sister waiting at home. The prescription she needed. The message she had sent earlier. "My younger sister," I admitted. Adrian nodded as though that explained everything. Maybe it did. The orchestra approached the end of the song. Around us, applause began building. The dance was nearly over. Yet something important had changed. Not in the room. In him. I could see it now. The walls people spoke about. The distance. The control. For a few minutes, they had disappeared. Then Adrian looked directly into my eyes and asked a question so unexpected that I almost missed a step. "Grace," he said quietly, "has anyone ever told you that you are far braver than you think you are?" For a moment, I forgot about the ballroom. I forgot about the guests. I forgot about the hundreds of eyes following every movement we made beneath the chandeliers. All I could think about was the question. Nobody had ever called me brave before. Responsible, maybe. Quiet. Hardworking. Invisible. Those were the words people usually chose. Brave belonged to other people. People who spoke confidently. People who knew exactly where they belonged. Not someone like me. "No," I admitted. "Nobody has." Adrian studied me carefully as the music continued around us. "Then they have not been paying attention." The words settled somewhere deep inside my chest. Before I could respond, the song finally came to an end. The last piano note drifted through the ballroom and disappeared. Applause erupted almost immediately. Loud, sustained, surprised. The crowd was not applauding the dance itself. They were applauding what it represented. The impossible sight of Adrian Blackwell sharing the center of the room with a waitress nobody had noticed an hour earlier. I felt my face warm again. Instinctively, I stepped back. The spell was broken. Reality returned. I was still an employee. He was still one of the most influential men in the city. The distance between our worlds remained enormous. Yet when I glanced toward the edge of the ballroom, something had changed. The young man who had spent the evening mocking me no longer looked amused. He looked uncomfortable, Several of his friends avoided eye contact entirely. For the first time all night, they understood what embarrassment felt like. Adrian noticed where I was looking. His expression became unreadable. "Do you want an apology?" he asked quietly. The question surprised me. "What?" From him. My eyes widened. I immediately shook my head. "No." Adrian looked genuinely curious. "Why not?" I considered the answer for a moment. Then I looked around the ballroom. At the guests. At the chandeliers. At the dance floor. At the hundreds of people who had witnessed everything. Because that is not what this was about. His gaze remained fixed on mine. Then what was it about? I took a slow breath. The answer felt simple now. Simpler than it had all evening. Respect. The orchestra began preparing for the next song. Guests slowly returned to their conversations. The room was moving again. Yet Adrian remained still, listening. "People think respect comes from power," I continued softly. "Or money. Or influence." My eyes briefly met his. "I do not think that anymore." Something flickered across his face. Something surprisingly vulnerable. Then it vanished. A woman in an elegant evening gown approached from across the ballroom. She paused beside Adrian and waited respectfully for his attention. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, "there are several people hoping to speak with you before the evening ends." He nodded politely, but did not move immediately. The woman glanced at me. Recognition flashed in her eyes. Not judgment. Not pity. Recognition. Then she excused herself and disappeared back into the crowd. Adrian exhaled quietly. "Duty calls." I smiled. I figured. For a second, neither of us moved. The moment felt strangely difficult to end. Finally, I stepped backward. "Thank you for the dance." "Grace." I stopped. His voice carried the same calm certainty it always had. Yet now there was something warmer beneath it. "You did not need me to prove your point tonight." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" A faint smile touched his face. "The room changed the moment you stopped doubting yourself." Before I could answer, he inclined his head respectfully and turned toward the waiting crowd. Within seconds, powerful people surrounded him again. Conversations resumed. Requests were made. Opportunities presented. The entire ballroom returned to orbit around Adrian Blackwell. Yet as I stood alone near the edge of the dance floor, watching him disappear into the crowd, I realized something unexpected. Tonight had changed him too. Because just before he vanished among the guests, he looked back over his shoulder. And for the first time all evening, the most guarded man in the room seemed completely unguarded. The ballroom slowly returned to normal after that. Or at least it tried to. Music resumed. Conversations restarted. Champagne glasses clinked beneath the chandeliers. Yet something fundamental had shifted. People looked at me differently now. Not because I had suddenly become important. Because they had finally noticed I existed. The realization felt strange. I spent years blending into the background. Now complete strangers nodded politely when I passed their tables. Some even smiled. The attention should have felt satisfying. Instead, it felt temporary. Like glitter settling after a performance. By midnight, many guests had begun leaving. The auction was over. The speeches were finished. The orchestra played softer music while staff members quietly prepared for cleanup. I was collecting empty glasses near the ballroom entrance when an elderly woman stopped beside me. Her silver hair was arranged perfectly. Her emerald necklace probably cost more than my apartment. Yet her smile felt genuine. "Grace." I turned. "Yes, ma'am." She studied me for a moment. Then she laughed softly. "I have spent 20 years attending events like this." I smiled politely. "That sounds exhausting." The woman laughed again. "It is." Her expression softened. "Do not let this place change you." Before I could respond, she gently squeezed my hand and continued toward the exit. The brief interaction stayed with me. Maybe because she seemed sincere. Maybe because her words echoed something I had been feeling all evening. Around 12:30, I finally escaped into one of the quieter hallways behind the ballroom. My feet ached. My shoulders hurt. I leaned against a wall and closed my eyes for a few seconds. The silence felt wonderful. Then I heard footsteps approaching. I opened my eyes and immediately froze. Adrian Blackwell was walking down the corridor alone. No crowd. No entourage. No admirers waiting for his attention. Just him. For a second, neither of us spoke. The distant sound of music drifted from the ballroom behind us. "Long night?" he asked. I laughed softly. "You have no idea." His gaze moved toward the stack of empty trays beside me. I might. Something about the answer made me smile. Adrian stopped a few feet away. The hallway lighting was softer than the ballroom, warmer. Without the crowd surrounding him, he looked different, less intimidating, more human. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You seem to enjoy asking me questions." "That is not an answer." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Go ahead." I hesitated for only a moment. "Why did you really say yes?" Adrian looked thoughtful, not surprised, as though he had been expecting the question. "Because everyone else expected me to say no." I laughed. "That sounds exactly like something you would do." "Perhaps." His expression became more serious. But that was not the entire reason. The hallway suddenly felt very quiet. I waited. Adrian glanced toward the ballroom doors before looking back at me. "When that man embarrassed you earlier, everyone saw a waitress." His voice remained calm. "I saw someone trying very hard not to lose her dignity." The words caught me completely off guard. For several seconds, I could not think of a response. Adrian continued. "Most people surrender that long before they realize it is happening." I looked down at the floor. "You make me sound stronger than I am." "No." His answer came immediately. "I think you are stronger than you know." My throat tightened unexpectedly. Nobody had ever spoken to me like that before. Not teachers, not employers, not anyone. Before I could find the right words, Adrian reached into his jacket pocket. He removed a small folded piece of paper and handed it to me. Confused, I opened it. Inside was the name of a children's foundation. The name hit me instantly. My heart skipped. I knew that foundation. I knew it very well. It was the center where I had spent part of my childhood after my parents died. Slowly, I looked back up at him. Adrian's expression revealed nothing. Yet suddenly a memory surfaced. Annual donations. Anonymous funding. Years of support that had kept the center open when nobody else stepped forward. And for the first time that night, I realized I had seen his name before. For a moment, I could not speak. The folded paper trembled slightly in my hand as memories rushed back. The Children's Foundation had been more than a building. It had been safety. It had been warm meals when there were none at home. It had been tutors who stayed late and counselors who listened when life felt impossible. Most importantly, it had survived because of anonymous donations that arrived every year when funding disappeared. Nobody ever knew where the money came from. Nobody ever knew who kept the doors open. Until now. I looked up slowly. "It was you." Adrian did not answer immediately. He glanced down the quiet hallway toward the distant ballroom before returning his attention to me. "The foundation helped someone important to me many years ago," he said. "I decided to return the favor." I laughed softly through the emotion tightening my throat. That is a very complicated way of saying yes. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Not intimidated. Not cautious. Simply uncomfortable with being thanked. That told me more than any explanation could. "You never told anyone?" I asked. Adrian shook his head. The donations were not about recognition. I stared at him in disbelief. The entire city seemed to know his name. Powerful people watched every move he made. Yet one of the kindest things he had ever done remained hidden. "I knew your name before tonight," I said quietly. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You did?" I nodded. "Not because of newspapers or rumors." My eyes moved to the paper in my hand. "Because people at that foundation used to pray for whoever kept helping us." For the first time since I met him, Adrian had no response. The silence between us felt different now. Softer. More honest. Somewhere beyond the hallway, the final guests were leaving the gala. Staff members rolled carts across marble floors. The evening was ending. Yet somehow this felt like the most important moment of the night. "That is why I was not afraid of you," I admitted. Adrian frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" I smiled. "I did not realize who you were at first. But after I saw your name tonight, something felt familiar." I took a slow breath. Cruel people do not spend years helping children they will never meet. His gaze held mine. Neither of us looked away. Then something remarkable happened. The guarded expression I had seen all evening finally disappeared. Not completely. Just enough. Enough for me to see the man behind the reputation. The man behind the power. The man who quietly carried responsibilities nobody knew existed. "You should get home," he said eventually. I laughed. That is a very dramatic way to end this conversation. A faint smile appeared. "I have a reputation to maintain." We both laughed then. The sound echoed softly through the empty hallway. For a moment, neither wealth nor status nor influence seemed to matter. We were simply two people standing beneath warm lights at the end of a very long night. Adrian reached into his jacket and handed me a business card. Simple, elegant, Nothing except his name and a phone number. If your sister ever needs help finding resources, he said, call that number. My eyes widened immediately. I cannot accept that. You are not accepting money. His voice remained calm. You are accepting information. I looked down at the card, then back at him. Thank you. Adrian inclined his head. You are welcome, Grace. As I turned to leave, I paused and looked over my shoulder one last time. The most feared man in Boston stood alone beneath the hallway lights, watching me go. Then I realized what he had meant all along. He had not given me wealth. He had not given me power. He had not even given me special treatment. The one thing Adrian Blackwell had never offered anyone so freely was trust. And somehow, on a night that began with humiliation and ended with understanding, that was exactly what I had taken with me.